For 78 years I have carried a silence so heavy that it has shaped every breath I have taken, every word I have spoken, and every moment I have lived. It is a silence forged in pain, wrapped tightly around my heart like an ancient shroud that no amount of time could unravel. I have hidden behind smiles and polite nods, behind the walls of my small home, and the careful distance I kept from those who might ask the questions I dared not answer. For 60 years, this secret has been my shadow, a weight pressing down on my spirit with an almost physical force, making even the simplest joys feel out of reach and the warm embrace of trust a distant dream. I have lived through winters of loneliness, where the cold seeped into my bones, not from the weather, but from the absence of understanding and the fear of exposure. At night, I would lie awake with a heart pounding loud enough to drown out the gentle ticking of the clock, wondering if the day would ever come when the truth could be spoken without shattering the fragile peace I had carved out for myself. This secret is not just a memory, but a living, breathing part of me, whispering in the quiet moments and colouring my dreams with shadows that refuse to fade. I have thought often about the weight of silence and how it can imprison even the strongest souls, but also how it can protect those who are not yet ready to face the storm that truth often brings. There have been times when I felt suffocated by the secrecy, moments when the ache of loneliness became unbearable, and I longed to break free and speak aloud the words I had kept locked away. Yet the fear was always stronger, the fear of disbelief, of judgment, of losing everything I had left. It is strange how a secret can become a prison, but it is even stranger how it can feel like the only shield you have against a world that seems too cruel to bear your pain. I have seen friends and family drift away, unable to cross the invisible barrier that the secret built between us. I have watched myself grow older, lines etching stories of hidden sorrow across my face, my eyes growing weary from carrying the burden alone. Sometimes I wonder if the years of silence have changed me into someone unrecognizable, a stranger living inside her own skin, always careful not to let the real self slip through the cracks. And yet, beneath the layers of fear and regret, there is a quiet flame that has never died, a small, stubborn hope that someday the truth will find its way out of the darkness, that it will not destroy but heal, that my voice will not be silenced any longer. I do not know what that day will look like or what it will cost me, but I feel it approaching like a slow dawn after the longest night. I am tired of carrying this secret alone, and tired of the invisible chains that have held me prisoner. It is time to find the courage that has been buried beneath the years of fear and pain, to lift the weight from my shoulders, and to speak. I want to believe that even after all this time, there is a chance for freedom, not just for me, but for anyone who has ever been silenced by their own past. So here I am, standing on the edge of a new beginning, my heart trembling but determined. The weight of silence has been heavy, but it will not break me. I am ready to listen to the whispers of hope and to let the light of truth guide me forward. And if my voice can carry even a fraction of that healing to others, then perhaps this long journey of quiet suffering will finally find its purpose. I can still see that day with haunting clarity, a photograph etched in my mind's eye that refuses to fade, no matter how many years have passed. I was barely 18, standing on the cusp of everything that was supposed to be bright and full of promise, yet the shadows of a single moment stretched long and dark enough to swallow my entire future. It was a betrayal not born from malice alone, but from the quiet cruelty of those who choose power over kindness, from the silent agreement of a world that turns away from inconvenient truths. The face of the person who betrayed me is burned into my memory, a trusted figure, whose smile once brought warmth but turned cold and cruel when no one else was watching. The wound was not just physical, but a fracture deep inside my soul that cracked the foundation of my self-worth and planted a seed of fear that would grow into a forest of silence. I remember the way the walls seemed to close in around me afterward, the suffocating weight of shame and confusion that tangled with my grief and made every breath a struggle. I tried to speak, to shout into the void that swallowed my cries, but my words were caught in the thick air of disbelief and dismissal. No one wanted to hear the truth, and even I began to doubt myself, questioning if I was the one who was broken or if the world had simply forgotten how to listen. The betrayal shaped everything that came after, like a dark thread woven through the tapestry of my life, influencing how I saw myself and how I allowed others to see me. Relationships that should have been safe became minefields, and trust, once given freely, became a currency too precious to spend lightly. I withdrew behind carefully constructed walls, becoming a ghost among the living, hiding my scars beneath layers of quiet resilience. My youthful dreams of love, success, and happiness were overshadowed by a cautious heart and a mind always alert for danger, real or imagined. I often compared myself to a fragile glass ornament, once shattered. No matter how carefully the pieces are glued back together, the cracks remain visible, the strength forever compromised. There were moments when I felt anger flare like wildfire, burning away the self-doubt and filling me with a fierce desire for justice. Yet the fear of retaliation, the risk of being labeled a liar or a troublemaker, kept those flames smoldering quietly beneath the surface. I learned to walk softly through the world, to avoid the places and people that reminded me of that painful day, to smile when required and hide the storm brewing inside. I became an expert at wearing masks, sometimes a serene expression, other times one of indifference, but always a mask that concealed the fragile child who longed to be heard and believed. The silence that followed that moment of betrayal was not just my own. It was the echo of countless others whose voices were stifled by shame and fear. It was a prison built not of iron bars, but of whispered doubts and invisible walls, trapping me in a life half-lived. As the years unfolded, I understood that this secret was not just a burden, but a defining part of who I had become, shaping my choices and forging the woman who would one day carry the weight of 60 years of silence. Yet despite all that pain, the shadows of the past could never completely extinguish the faint light of hope that flickered somewhere deep within, waiting patiently for the day it could shine again. For years, I lived behind closed doors, not just literally, but within the fortress of my own making. A self-imposed exile where silence became both my shield and my prison. The heavy curtain that separated me from the warmth of connection and the sharp edges of vulnerability. I crafted routines that numbed the ache, filling my days with tasks and small distractions, like a gardener tending a thorny rose bush, nurturing what could bloom while carefully avoiding the thorns that could draw blood. I learned early how to speak in measured tones, how to laugh on cue, and how to fold my pain into the invisible creases of my posture, so no one would see the tremor beneath the surface. Friends and family surrounded me like a distant shore, familiar yet unreachable, their voices soft waves that broke against my silent walls but never breached them. I remember sitting at dinners, the clink of plates and the murmur of conversation swirling around me like a storm, while inside I felt an endless desert stretching between us, dry and vast, where my secrets were buried like forgotten ruins. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when the desire to speak surged up like a tide threatening to break free, when the words hovered on the tip of my tongue, trembling and urgent. But each time, the fear took hold, like a cold hand clamping over my voice, reminding me of the cost, the risks, and the unknown that lay beyond confession. I saw the faces of those who might listen and feared the flicker of doubt or pity that could fracture relationships already fragile from distance and misunderstanding. In those silent battles, I became a master of restraint, a conductor orchestrating the quiet symphony of my life, where every note was calculated to keep the peace at the expense of my own truth. My coping mechanisms were subtle and unspoken. Journals filled with carefully chosen words that never left my drawer. Walks taken under the veil of night to chase away the shadows that daylight could not dispel. And prayer whispered into the darkness, seeking solace from a God who seemed to listen without answering. I wore my silence like a heavy coat in winter, protective but suffocating, warming me from the cold but weighing me down with its bulk. The loneliness was a constant companion, a ghost that lingered in quiet rooms and empty spaces between words. Even in moments of laughter and shared joy, there was a hollow echo that reminded me of the parts of myself I kept hidden. It was a solitude not born from the absence of others, but from the absence of true understanding, the invisible barrier built from unspoken pain. Sometimes I wondered if the silence was more than a burden, if it had become a part of me, as much a habit as breathing, a rhythm that dictated the pace of my days and the shape of my dreams. I longed for freedom, but was tethered by the cords of fear and habit, unsure if I could survive the storm that speaking out might unleash. Yet, even in my quiet retreat, a small ember of hope smouldered beneath the ashes of restraint, a secret longing for the day when I might step beyond the walls I had built and find a voice strong enough to shatter the silence that had held me captive for so long. One ordinary afternoon, the post arrived with its usual quiet insistence. But among the familiar bills and advertisements lay a letter that stirred something deep within me, a delicate, cream-coloured envelope, its edges worn but pristine, bearing the embossed seal of a school I had not thought of in decades and an invitation to a reunion I never imagined I would receive. Holding that letter felt like touching a fragile bridge between past and present, a portal beckoning me back to a time when my life had still held untarnished promise, before the weight of silence had settled so heavily upon my shoulders. The words inside were both simple and profound, inviting me to reconnect with faces faded by time, to walk once again the halls where laughter had once echoed freely, and to share moments frozen in memory but softened by years. Yet as I read, a storm of conflicting emotions swirled within me. Hesitation gripped my heart like cold hands clutching a fragile flame, threatening to snuff out the flicker of courage that the letter had sparked. Would returning mean reopening old wounds, exposing parts of myself I had long buried beneath layers of restraint? Could I face those ghosts of my youth without losing the tenuous peace I had carved out in the decades since? I pictured the faces of classmates I barely remembered, wondering who had changed and who had remained the same, and more terrifyingly, whether any of them knew or suspected the secret I had kept locked away for so long. The thought of standing among them, pretending to be whole while carrying the fractures of a hidden past, made my chest tighten with a familiar ache. Yet, beneath the fear, there was a quiet, persistent hope, a whisper that maybe this was the moment I had been waiting for, a chance to finally step into the light and breathe freely after a lifetime spent in shadow. The letter was like a sudden gust of wind, stirring the stillness of my carefully ordered world, unsettling dust motes of memory and possibility. I wrestled with the decision, weighing the comfort of silence against the uncertain promise of reunion. Would this gathering be a gentle gathering of old friends rekindling warmth and laughter, or a mirror reflecting the pain I had worked so hard to forget? The invitation was not just to a social event, but to a crossroads, where the past and future might collide with the force of truth. I thought of the life I had led, quiet, cautious, marked by absence, and wondered if attending might offer a path to healing, or if it would unravel everything I had built. I knew that once I said yes, there would be no turning back. The letter had awakened a part of me that had long lain dormant, and though fear whispered of risks and regret, a deeper part urged me to embrace this chance. I folded the invitation carefully and placed it beside my favorite chair, where the afternoon sun spilled like warm honey across the room. For the first time in years, my heart fluttered with anticipation and dread entwined, like two dancers locked in an eternal embrace. The unexpected invitation was more than a summons to a reunion. It was a summons to myself, to confront the past, and perhaps begin the journey toward freedom. The morning I finally decided to attend the reunion dawned with a sky as uncertain as the turmoil in my heart, pale and hesitant like the fragile courage I was trying to summon from the depths of my soul. Standing before the mirror, I studied the face that had weathered decades of silence and sorrow, searching for the woman who had once dreamed so freely beneath brighter skies. Packing my bag felt like folding a piece of myself into each item: a scarf worn thin from years of quiet comfort, a photo tucked away that carried memories both tender and painful, and the carefully chosen clothes meant to cloak me in confidence rather than concealment. Every step of preparation was heavy with the weight of anticipation and fear, as if I were embarking on a journey across a vast and treacherous sea where the destination promised both refuge and storm. As I closed the door behind me, the familiar streets seemed to blur and shift, their ordinary shapes transformed by the flood of memories that surged up unbidden. Echoes of laughter in long-forgotten classrooms, whispered secrets in shadowed hallways, and the faces of friends whose lives had since drifted far from mine like leaves scattered by an autumn wind. The car hummed beneath me as I travelled the miles toward a place that once held my youth and now held the key to a future I dared to imagine but could scarcely trust. Anxiety settled in my chest like a restless bird trapped behind ribs, fluttering with frantic hope and piercing doubt. Would I recognize anyone? Would I be recognized? More painfully, would my past remain buried or rise like a tide to crash upon the fragile shores of my present? The rhythmic hum of the road became a steady drumbeat, marking time in a way that echoed the steady, measured rhythm of my breath as I tried to quell the storm inside. Memories flowed like a river swollen with rain, some shimmering with light, others dark and swirling with the detritus of pain. I recalled the promises I had made to myself to stay strong, to guard the fragile pieces of my heart, to be cautious yet open. Each mile brought me closer not only to the reunion, but to a reckoning I had avoided for so long. The landscape outside the window unfolded like the pages of a book I had once loved, but had not dared to reread until now. A tapestry of fields and trees that seemed to hold their own quiet stories, silent witnesses to the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. As the city approached, its skyline jagged and gleaming against the afternoon light, I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar but welcome, a fragile thread of hope weaving through the fabric of my nerves. This journey was more than a physical crossing. It was a pilgrimage to reclaim a part of myself lost to fear and time. I thought of the faces I might see, the conversations that might unfold, and the silence that might finally break. The car slowed, the familiar streets narrowing into a place that felt both foreign and deeply personal. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension coiling within me and slowly unfurling like the first tentative bloom of spring. The journey had been long, not just in miles, but in years of preparation, both spoken and unspoken. As I stepped out and felt the cool air brush against my skin, I realized that this was only the beginning, the first step toward a path that could lead me through shadows into light. The room was alive with a hum of voices and laughter, a tapestry of sound woven from threads of memory and the present. As I stepped hesitantly into the space where so many years had been folded away like old letters in a forgotten drawer. Faces I once knew were there, some transformed by time, others stubbornly holding on to the essence of who they had been, each one a living reflection of the past and a reminder of the passage of years. I recognized a few immediately, the familiar tilt of a head, the curve of a smile that had once been shared in youthful moments of joy and sorrow. But many were strangers, shaped by the hands of time and circumstance, their eyes carrying stories that I could only guess at, their expressions a mixture of welcome and wariness. It was a room filled with ghosts and angels alike, the air thick with the bittersweet fragrance of reunion, the scent of hope mingled with the faint sting of loss. I caught sight of a friend who had been like a sister once, her hair now streaked with silver, her eyes still holding the warmth I remembered, though shadowed by the weight of years. Yet others were conspicuous by their absence, their empty chairs like wounds in the fabric of the gathering, silent testaments to paths that had diverged, to lives ended too soon, or to hearts too fragile to return. The atmosphere shimmered with a fragile light, at times glowing with genuine laughter and heartfelt embraces, and at others, heavy with the quiet tension of unspoken stories and memories best left untouched. I felt my heart swell with a complex ache, a mixture of gratitude for this chance to reconnect, and a pang of sorrow for all that had been lost in the spaces between us. Conversations flitted around me like butterflies, touching lightly on the surface of the past, but often retreating before the deeper wounds could be exposed. I found myself listening more than speaking, savoring the familiar cadence of voices, yet wary of the inevitable questions that lurked beneath the polite exchanges. Each glance exchanged carried the weight of shared history and the caution born of years apart, as though we were all walking a delicate dance between rediscovery and preservation. I saw smiles that seemed to mask old regrets, eyes that flickered with memories too painful to voice, and hands that trembled slightly, betraying nerves beneath composed exteriors. The room felt like a bridge between who we were and who we had become, a place where the past was both a comfort and a challenge, offering connection yet demanding honesty. As I moved through the crowd, I was struck by the invisible threads that still tied us together, weaving a web of familiarity and distance, affection and restraint. The reunion was not just a gathering of faces, but a silent reckoning with time itself, a moment to confront the echoes of who we were, the shadows of what we had endured, and the fragile hope of what we might still become. Amid the mingling of joy and hesitation, laughter and silence, I realized that this room held the power to heal or to reopen wounds, depending on the courage we found to face the truths buried beneath the years. I stood there, a part of this living mosaic, feeling the delicate tension of reunion wrap around me like a fragile cloak, knowing that the next moments would shape the course of what was to come. In the midst of the soft murmur of voices and the gentle clinking of glasses, my gaze settled on a figure whose presence seemed to cut through the fog of uncertainty that had wrapped itself tightly around me. It was a woman whose eyes held a quiet understanding, as if she carried within them the faintest traces of a shared secret. a flicker of recognition that both startled and comforted me, like the first fragile light breaking through a long, dark night. She approached with a calm confidence that belied the nervous flutter I felt deep in my chest. And when our eyes met, there was an unspoken exchange, a delicate thread weaving itself between us in that crowded room. Her smile was gentle, not the kind worn for polite conversation, but one born of empathy and an intuitive knowing that reached beyond words. I could not tell if she was a stranger or someone from the shadows of my past, yet the warmth that radiated from her presence offered a balm to the raw edges of my guarded heart. In that moment, a fragile trust began to take root, like a seedling pushing timidly through the cracks of hardened earth after a long winter. She spoke to me softly, her voice a soothing melody that carried a promise of safety and understanding, without pressing for details I was not ready to share. Her questions were thoughtful, not probing, but gently opening a door I had long kept closed, allowing a sliver of light to spill into the darkened room of my memories. It was as if she sensed the weight I carried and was willing to bear a part of it, offering companionship in a journey I had feared to walk alone. Our conversation was a delicate dance, punctuated by pauses where words seemed inadequate, and the language of silence spoke volumes. I found myself lowering the walls that had protected me for so long, sharing fragments of my story in cautious whispers, each one a tentative step toward healing. She listened without judgment, her eyes reflecting a kindness that had been absent from my life for so many years. In her presence, I felt a flicker of hope, small and fragile but undeniable, that perhaps I was not as isolated as I had believed, that the burden I carried could be shared and lightened. The world outside that reunion room felt distant, irrelevant, compared to the quiet sanctuary we created between us. It was a reminder that even after decades of silence, connection was still possible, and that the threads of understanding could weave a new tapestry from the frayed edges of the past. As the evening wore on, our conversation lingered like a soft melody, a promise that this was only the beginning of a journey toward truth and reconciliation. I walked away from that encounter feeling the stirrings of courage, a renewed determination to face the shadows with a companion by my side. The glimmer of hope that had blossomed in that moment was a fragile but precious gift, one that I vowed to nurture as I took the next steps toward reclaiming my voice and my life. Amidst the steady hum of the reunion's warmth and chatter, subtle moments began to chip away at the carefully constructed armor I had worn for so long, like the slow but persistent erosion of stone by gentle waves that eventually reveal the fragile core beneath, vulnerable and raw. A casual remark, a shared laugh that carried a shade too much familiarity, and a glance exchanged between old friends stirred fragments of memories I had long locked away, whispering truths that unsettled the quiet order of my silence. These small cracks, almost imperceptible at first, widened with every passing hour, each one unraveling threads of denial I had wrapped tightly around my heart, forcing me to confront emotions that were both frightening and strangely liberating. I found myself drawn into conversations that brushed close to the edges of my past, where names and places echoed faintly like distant bells, tolling for a time long gone but never forgotten. The scent of the room, a blend of old perfume and polished wood, mingled with the taste of bittersweet nostalgia on my tongue, stirring feelings I had buried beneath years of restraint. Faces that had once been part of the fabric of my life now seemed like chapters in a book I had never fully read, their stories intertwining with mine in ways I had resisted acknowledging. As laughter rang out and tears shimmered in eyes both new and familiar, I felt the weight of my silence grow heavier. pressing down on my chest like the quiet accumulation of snow that eventually threatens to collapse the strongest roof. For so long, I had convinced myself that silence was a shield, a fortress protecting me from pain and judgment, but now I questioned whether it had become the very prison that kept me confined. The burden I carried, once a solitary load borne with quiet dignity, felt suddenly amplified by the presence of those around me, each carrying their own unseen wounds and unspoken stories. The reunion became a mirror, reflecting not only the passage of time, but the consequences of the secrets we keep, the cost of unshared pain. I realized that the silence I had clung to was not a balm, but a barrier, isolating me from the healing power of connection and understanding. A conversation with a former friend, whose voice trembled with empathy and regret, cut through my defenses. Their words, like gentle rain, soaking into parched earth, softening the hardened layers of my heart. I began to see that my story, once a source of shame and fear, could become a bridge instead of a wall, a path toward reconciliation rather than further isolation. The doubts that had shadowed my every thought now glimmered with a fragile light, illuminating the possibility that I did not have to carry this burden alone any longer. In the quiet moments between conversations, I caught my reflection in a window, a face marked by years, but alive with the stirrings of courage and awakening. The cracks in my armor revealed not weakness, but the first glimmers of strength born from vulnerability. The reunion, which had begun as a journey back in time, was becoming a journey forward, toward healing, toward truth, and toward the long-awaited freedom that comes when silence is finally broken. Late that evening, when the gathering had thinned and the warm glow of the chandeliers softened into shadows that pooled like ink in the corners of the room, I found myself drawn to the one person whose presence had become a fragile anchor amidst the swirling sea of memories and unspoken truths. The air was thick with quiet, punctuated only by the distant murmur of voices fading into the night. And as we sat side by side, the weight of my long-held secret pressed against my ribs like a stone I had carried far too long. The moment was fragile, balanced between hope and fear, as I took a trembling breath and let the words escape. Words I had kept hidden for 6 decades, locked away behind walls of silence that had both protected and imprisoned me. My voice was barely above a whisper, fragile like the first fragile crack in ice that signals the coming thaw. Yet each syllable felt like a release, a lifting of a burden so immense it had shaped every moment of my life. As I spoke, the memories surged forth, moments of pain and betrayal, of isolation and despair, all woven together into the fabric of my past. The person beside me listened without interruption, their eyes soft with understanding, reflecting back the truth I had feared to share. Relief mingled with the sharp sting of vulnerability, like standing naked in a cold rain, exposed to the elements, yet strangely cleansed by the downpour. I waited for a sign, a shift in expression, a word, a gesture, that would tell me I was still accepted, still seen as whole, despite the darkness I carried. The fear of rejection clung to me like a shadow, threatening to unravel the fragile thread of trust we had begun to weave. But instead of turning away, the hand that reached out to grasp mine was steady and warm, a quiet affirmation that I was not alone. In that embrace, I felt the first true connection I had known in decades, a tether that pulled me from the depths of solitude toward a place of shared understanding. The confession was both an end and a beginning, a severing of the ties to a past that had held me captive, and an opening of the door to a future where my story could breathe and grow. I realized then that the secret I had guarded so fiercely was not a chain, but a key, one that could unlock the healing that silence had denied me. The night deepened around us, but within that small circle of light and trust, a fragile hope took root, whispering that perhaps my voice could be a beacon for others who had suffered in silence. The vulnerability I had feared might break me instead became the source of strength I had long sought. And as the hours passed, I found myself telling more, unburdening piece by piece the heavy tapestry of pain that had defined me for so long. By the time dawn approached, I felt lighter, not because the past had changed, but because I had finally shared it, allowing another soul to hold the truth with me. That confession in the dark was a turning point, a moment when fear bowed to courage, when isolation gave way to connection, and when silence was finally broken to make room for healing. The moment my secret was spoken aloud, it felt as if a stone had been dropped into the still waters of the reunion, sending ripples radiating outward in slow, trembling circles that touched every soul present. Faces that had once held only polite smiles now flickered with surprise, disbelief, and something more profound, an unspoken recognition that beneath the surface of this gathering lay a reservoir of untold pain and hidden truths waiting to rise. The air grew charged with a fragile electricity, as hushed conversations sparked like kindling and eyes met with a new openness, daring to glimpse the shadows that had long been kept at bay. I saw the walls of silence begin to crumble, not just around me, but within others, as if the courage to speak had awakened dormant voices, and the burden of years spent in solitude could finally be shared. One by one, people began to step forward, their stories emerging hesitantly like seedlings pushing through frozen earth toward the sun. Some voices trembled with the weight of long-held sorrow, while others carried a quiet strength born of survival. Tears glistened, and hands reached out to grasp, to comfort, to acknowledge that no one was alone in their suffering. Confrontations unfolded gently, not with anger, but with the raw honesty of years spent carrying invisible wounds. Old wounds were reopened, but in the safety of this circle they began to heal. The room became a sanctuary where truth was honored, and the hidden fractures between people were laid bare in hopes of mending. I watched as the gathering transformed from a mere reunion into a gathering of souls bound by shared pain and the promise of renewal. Stories once whispered behind closed doors and hidden beneath layers of shame found breath and light. The ripple effect of my confession sparked a collective reckoning, where the invisible burdens many carried were given a name and a place. I felt the weight of years begin to lift, replaced by a sense of belonging and understanding that had eluded me for so long. The strength in vulnerability was palpable, weaving us together in a tapestry of resilience. The reunion, once a simple gathering, became a turning point, a crucible where silence was shattered and healing began. Amid the swelling tide of emotion, I sensed that the power of shared truth could dismantle the isolation that had kept us prisoners. I realized that my decision to speak had not only freed me, but had opened a door for others to step into the light. The echoes of confession lingered like a gentle song, carrying the promise that from pain could emerge hope, and from brokenness, a path to wholeness. As the night deepened, the atmosphere shifted from one of tentative caution to one of quiet celebration of courage, of survival, and of the human spirit's remarkable capacity to heal. The ripple I had started was growing into a wave strong enough to carry us all toward a future where silence no longer had power over us. And in that moment, I felt a profound connection to those around me, bound not by the years lost, but by the shared journey toward light and freedom. Reconnecting with those I once held dear, but from whom I had drifted, felt like stepping onto a bridge long damaged by neglect, its wooden planks worn and uncertain beneath my feet, yet still standing, inviting cautious crossing. The first conversations were fragile, weighed down by years of silence and unspoken pain, as if we were strangers trying to remember how to speak the language of closeness again. I saw in their eyes a mix of hesitation and hope, the delicate dance of hearts reaching out while still wary of old wounds that might reopen. The air was thick with unspoken apologies and questions hanging like mist as we navigated the awkwardness that follows when time and secrets have created chasms between souls once intertwined. I felt the ghost of the past hovering in our interactions, a shadow that at times threatened to swallow the tentative warmth we were trying to build. But with each shared story and gentle touch, the walls began to crumble, revealing the tender roots of connection that had never truly died. There were moments of silence so profound, they spoke louder than words, as we sat together, learning again how to exist in the same space without fear or guardedness. The small gestures, a lingering glance, a hand lightly resting on an arm, a tentative smile, became the bricks with which we rebuilt what had been broken. I found myself recalling the laughter that once flowed freely and the shared memories that had shaped our bonds, like scattered pieces of a broken mirror reflecting fractured but beautiful glimpses of a shared past. The process was neither swift nor seamless. There were setbacks and moments when old resentments bubbled to the surface, threatening to undo the fragile progress. Yet, beneath the surface, a steady current of forgiveness and understanding began to flow, carrying us toward reconciliation. I witnessed the quiet courage it took for each of us to confront not only the pain, but also the choices that had kept us apart. Conversations that once seemed impossible unfolded with a surprising grace, like the first tentative shoots of spring breaking through frozen soil. In opening my truth, I had invited others to do the same, and together we began to heal the fractures that had long defined our relationships. The familiar voices and faces became sources of comfort and strength, reminding me that no matter the distance time or silence had created, the bonds of family and friendship could endure. I felt the warmth of renewed trust, fragile yet promising, weaving a tapestry of hope that stretched beyond the immediate moments. It was a reclamation of what had been lost, a quiet but profound victory over the isolation that once consumed me. As we shared meals, stories, and quiet evenings, I realized that rebuilding was not about erasing the past, but about embracing it with honesty and compassion, allowing wounds to scar with meaning rather than pain. The bridges we reconstructed bore the marks of their fractures, yet those marks told stories of survival, resilience, and the enduring power of love. With each step forward, I felt lighter, more whole, as if the weight of years spent carrying my secret was slowly lifting. The journey toward reconciliation was ongoing, a path that required patience and grace, but one that held the promise of belonging and peace. In opening myself to others, I had found not just forgiveness, but also the strength to forgive, and in that exchange, the broken bridges began to shine with a new and fragile beauty. Forgiveness arrived slowly, like the first soft light of dawn, creeping gently over a landscape long shadowed by the night, and I found myself standing at the edge of that new day, trembling yet eager to step beyond the weight of guilt and pain that had anchored me for so many years. It was a journey inward that demanded more courage than I had ever imagined, for to forgive meant peeling back the layers of hurt and betrayal, exposing the raw wounds beneath, and facing the complex tapestry of emotions woven into my story. I wrestled with the echoes of self-recrimination, those harsh voices that whispered blame and shame, convincing me that I was somehow responsible for the darkness that had enveloped my life. But as I delved deeper, I began to see that my suffering was not a burden I bore alone, nor was it a reflection of my worth, but rather a testament to survival in a world that had often turned a blind eye. Embracing forgiveness meant acknowledging the humanity in those who had caused pain, recognizing that many were themselves trapped by fear, ignorance, or brokenness. It was not about excusing harm or forgetting the scars left behind, but about releasing the corrosive grip of resentment that threatened to consume my own spirit. I pictured forgiveness as a river, at first sluggish and murky, yet gaining clarity and strength as it flowed, carrying away the debris of bitterness and sorrow. There were days when the journey felt like walking through a storm, the winds of doubt and grief battering me, threatening to pull me back into the safe harbor of anger and blame. But each time, I found the resolve to keep moving forward, buoyed by the fragile hope that peace lay beyond the tempest. I learned to be gentle with myself, understanding that healing is not linear, but a spiral, sometimes circling back to old pain before rising higher with renewed insight. In moments of quiet reflection, I spoke softly to my own heart, offering words of compassion that I had long withheld, nurturing a tenderness that began to mend the fractures within. I also confronted the shadows cast by those who had been complicit in my suffering, the bystanders whose silence had echoed louder than any accusation. Forgiveness for them was the most difficult, a slow unraveling of anger that freed me from the need to carry their burdens any longer. It was a reclamation of my power to choose peace rather than perpetual pain. As I embraced forgiveness, I felt a lightness seep into my being, a gradual unshackling from the chains of the past. The heavy cloak of bitterness fell away, revealing a resilient core that had always existed beneath the surface. I came to understand that forgiveness is not a single act, but a lifelong practice, a delicate dance of acceptance, release, and grace. It opened the door to self-love and renewed faith in the possibility of joy and connection. With each step toward forgiveness, I was reborn, not as a victim defined by suffering, but as a woman transformed by courage, compassion, and the unwavering hope that even the deepest wounds can give rise to profound healing. In letting go, I found freedom, and in freedom, the true measure of peace. The reunion had drawn to a close, its echoes lingering in the corners of my mind, like the last notes of a song that had been both haunting and hopeful. And as I made my way back to the quiet sanctuary of my home, I carried with me a transformation that felt as subtle as the shifting light of dawn, yet as profound as the turning of the seasons. The woman who returned was not the same as the one who had hesitated at the threshold days before, burdened by silence and shadow, but someone newly awakened to the possibilities of openness and connection. Each step I took upon familiar paths seemed imbued with fresh meaning, as if the very air around me had shifted to welcome a renewed spirit, and the simple acts of daily life, opening my front door, greeting neighbors with genuine smiles, lingering over a cup of tea in the afternoon sunlight, became acts of liberation rather than routine. The walls that had once contained me felt less like barriers and more like boundaries I could choose to cross, opening windows of vulnerability that allowed the warm breeze of community to flow in and chase away the chill of isolation. I found myself reaching out to old friends and acquaintances with a courage I had long thought lost, sharing stories and laughter that had been silenced for too long, and rediscovering the joy that comes from genuine connection. The small freedoms I had taken for granted in my youth, the freedom to speak my mind, to express my emotions without fear, to simply be seen and heard, now shimmered like precious jewels, each one a testament to the journey I had endured and the healing I was embracing. The neighborhood, once a backdrop to a life of quiet solitude, blossomed into a vibrant tapestry of relationships and shared moments, where familiar faces became anchors of belonging and support. I volunteered at the local community center, finding fulfillment in offering kindness and time to others. And in those exchanges, I discovered that my own healing was intertwined with the healing of those around me. The garden I tended in my backyard flourished under my renewed care, each bloom a symbol of resilience and new growth, reminding me daily that even after the harshest winters, life finds a way to bloom again. There were mornings when the sunlight filtered through my curtains in gentle golden rays, and I would sit quietly, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the second chance I had been given to live fully and authentically. I embraced the rhythms of my days with a newfound presence, savoring the tastes, sounds, and sensations that had once been dulled by years of emotional numbness. The transformation was not without its challenges. Old fears sometimes surfaced like shadows at dusk, reminding me of the long road still ahead. But I met them with the strength born of experience and the support of a community that had welcomed me back with open arms. In living more openly, I reclaimed parts of myself that had been hidden away, letting my true self shine with the quiet confidence of one who has faced darkness and emerged into light. This new beginning was not just a chapter in my life, but a whole new book, filled with pages waiting to be written with joy, connection, and the simple beauty of everyday freedom. As I looked toward the future, I felt a steady pulse of hope and possibility, knowing that the journey of healing and growth was ongoing, but that I would never again walk it alone. After the reunion, a quiet but persistent fire ignited within me, a gentle blaze that grew steadily until it became impossible to ignore, urging me to share the story I had carried for so long in silence. A story woven from threads of pain, resilience, and hope that I realized could no longer remain locked away in the shadows. It was as if the reunion had opened a window, letting in a fresh breeze that swept away the dust of years and filled my lungs with the courage I needed to speak my truth aloud. Writing became my refuge and my weapon, a way to translate the complex emotions swirling inside me into words that could reach others who, like me, had suffered in quiet isolation. Each sentence was a step forward, a gentle unraveling of the tangled knots of shame and fear. And as my story took shape on the page, I felt a healing beginning that was both personal and profound. I started sharing essays and reflections online, cautiously at first, testing the waters of public attention. But the response was unexpected and overwhelming. Messages from strangers whose lives had been touched by similar shadows, voices reaching out from the darkness to say, "You are not alone." Inspired by this connection, I took the next step into the world of speaking engagements and community gatherings, where the power of voice transcended the written word and created a space of shared understanding and solidarity. Standing before an audience, my heart still fluttered with nervousness, but the warmth that radiated from their attentive faces steadied my resolve and deepened my sense of purpose. I found that in telling my story, I was not only reclaiming my own voice, but also amplifying the voices of countless others who had been silenced by fear and stigma. Activism soon followed as a natural extension of this journey, a call to action that moved beyond personal healing to the desire to change the systems and attitudes that allow suffering to remain hidden and unaddressed. I joined support groups, participated in awareness campaigns, and collaborated with organizations dedicated to helping survivors find safety and justice. Each encounter reinforced the truth that our stories are powerful tools for change, capable of breaking cycles of silence and transforming pain into strength. Sharing my experience was not without its challenges. Moments of vulnerability brought waves of doubt and the occasional sting of judgment. But I met these obstacles with the steady confidence built from years of surviving in the shadows and emerging into the light. I learned to balance honesty with self-care, recognizing that healing is a lifelong process that requires patience and compassion. Through this work, I discovered a profound sense of community, a network of souls bound by shared struggles and united by the courage to speak out. The ripple effect of my story reached further than I had imagined, inspiring others to share their truths and seek the support they deserved. I realized that by breaking my silence, I had become a beacon of hope for those still trapped in the darkness, a living testament to the power of resilience and the possibility of transformation. As I continue to walk this path of sharing and advocacy, I carry with me the knowledge that every word spoken, every story told, is a step toward a world where silence no longer equals suffering and where the light of truth can shine freely for all who need it. After carrying the weight of my secret for 6 decades, I finally stand at a place where peace, once a distant and fragile dream, has taken root in the depths of my being like a quiet garden blossoming after a long, harsh winter. The journey has been winding and difficult, marked by shadows that threaten to consume me, but also illuminated by moments of courage, truth, and connection that have brought me to this serene shore where I can finally breathe freely. I have learned that truth is not merely a word spoken aloud, but a powerful force that can shatter chains, dissolve isolation, and build bridges between fractured hearts. The courage to face my past, to speak my pain into the open, has been both the hardest and the most liberating act of my life, like stepping into sunlight after years spent in a cave. Through sharing my story, I discovered the extraordinary strength found in human connection, how vulnerability can transform strangers into allies, silence into solidarity, and suffering into shared healing. The hands that reached out to hold mine, the eyes that met mine with understanding rather than judgment, became lifelines that pulled me from the depths of loneliness and despair. I carry now a deep gratitude for those who walked beside me on this path, for their compassion and their willingness to listen, which taught me that no one is truly alone in their struggles, no matter how heavy the burden. To those who still carry their painful secrets, hidden beneath layers of fear and shame, I offer this message of hope. The silence you guard need not be permanent, and the light of truth can find its way even through the darkest nights. It may seem impossible now, like reaching for a star just beyond your grasp, but the first step toward peace begins with the small, brave act of acknowledging your own worth and the possibility of healing. I know from experience that the road is not easy, and that forgiveness of oneself and of others is a delicate process requiring patience and grace. Yet within that journey lies the promise of freedom, a chance to reclaim your life from the shadows and to live with authenticity and joy. The peace I have found is not the absence of pain, but the presence of acceptance, the gentle knowing that my past no longer defines me and that my voice has power beyond what I ever imagined. It is a peace born of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to rise from suffering and to transform scars into stories of strength. As I reflect on all that has brought me here, I am filled with a quiet hope that my journey might inspire others to find their own paths toward healing and truth. Life is precious and fragile, and every day is an opportunity to step into the light, to break the silence, and to embrace the fullness of being seen and loved. My story is no longer just my own. It belongs to the countless souls who carry their own hidden burdens and who long for a voice to echo theirs in the vastness. To them, I say, Hold on to hope, nurture your courage, and know that peace, after the longest night, can indeed be found.